This is a public service announcement. The following presentation contains controversial information and ideas that could change the way you view the world. What you see and hear may soon compel you to take action. Viewer discretion is advised.
Now, do I understand correctly, intermixing Delaware and Cherokee are pretty much indistinguishable as far as
from our perspective,
from a membership standpoint?
Well, if you go back historically, you're looking at our predecessors. You would go Delaware, Raritan, Wenami, and just the name changes depending upon what historian's looking at them at what period. If you go back all the way to when the Dutch were here under Kieft, were referred to as the Raritan or the Unami. More current would be Delaware. And during the Cherokee migration of 1711, some Cherokees came up as they were passing through and they asked if they could stay. And those Cherokees intermarried with Delaware. So we are a Delaware tribe, a Lenape tribe with Cherokee members.
The Lenape are really I always thought the Lenape were a synonym for Delaware.
Delaware are Lenape, but I mean, when you look at Lenape, you have an Algonquin-speaking group of people. So we have Lenapes that are up in New York.
Right.
You know, Iroquois are cousins. So it's a larger ethnic group.
Lenape an umbrella term, essentially?
It refers to oldest people. We're referred to as the grandfathers. So it designates a more or less an Algonquin-speaking group of people.
That helps, thank you. I guess over the years it does get a little
well, there's a lot
mixed.
of tribes, and then as they begin getting recognition, everybody wants to differentiate themselves.
Now, the heart and soul of this lawsuit, as I understand it, basically boils down to the fact that the state of New Jersey really fails to recognize your particular tribe.
Well, it's really a little bit more than that. If you go all the way back to 1758 to present, the state of New Jersey has deliberately ignored every federal law and treaty in relationship to Native Americans, American Indians. They've broken every treaty. They've broken the Treaty of Easton. They've broken the Jay Treaty. They've broken the Ghent Treaty. They've violated the Trade and Intercourse Act of 1790, 1793. They violated the American Indian Citizenship Act of 24, the Civil Rights Act of 64, the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871. I mean, it's a plethora. This is just the complaint. The brief itself is almost 100 pages.
But there is some recognition by the state of certain tribes, are there not, that are in effect related to the Sand Hill branch?
In the state of New Jersey, the other tribes I refer to them as Indian entities that sit on the Indian Commission in Trenton are actually 501c3 nonprofits. And the reason I know this is our previous chief, my first cousin, even created their name for them when he was the only funding agency in the state. So he created the Nanticoke-Lenni Lenape, but their business structure. Unfortunately, the courts have just ruled. Would you like me to wait for that to pass? Unfortunately for some of the Ramapo over at Mawa, they had to go to court to remove their chief, and the courts ruled that actually they're a business structure, so they don't have a chief. He's a CEO of a nonprofit. So I refer to them as Indian entities. While they are American Indians, they are not an American Indian tribe.
They're not recognized as a tribal entity by the state, only as a business entity, is what you're saying?
Yes, and that is their structure. They have a corporate structure.
Okay.
We are a tribe. We are indigenous to the state, and we've been here for thousands of years. 18 months ago, Dr. Stefano at the Patterson Museum returned 1,800-year-old bones to us that were a direct link to my first cousin's DNA, and we repatriated them. My family's been here for thousands of years. We have a traditional tribal structure, and when the state of New Jersey created the Indian Commission, they neglected to fold the Sand Hill into it. Prior to the year 2000, If you look at any publication that talks about Indian commissions, the New Jersey Indian Office was always spoken of as the Indian Commission. That has traditionally been chaired by the chief of Sandhill, because we were the only tribe in the state. All indigenous people, including the Delaware and Oklahoma, recognize us as the indigenous people that belong in the state. Unfortunately, the state of New Jersey has refused to have any dialogue whatsoever.
And that is what this lawsuit seeks, is dialogue, recognition, and some reparations.
It's beyond reparation. If you take a look at the ratification of the Constitution for the state of New Jersey, August 13th, 1844, that's when it was ratified. That's when the state became a state.
Not to be argumentative, but wouldn't the state have become a state when it was accepted into the Union back in the late 18th century?
Their constitution would have had to have been signed for them to be a state.
But they were recognized, the federal government recognized it as a state. They had voting rights in Washington as a state.
Federal government recognizes us as a tribe, but we don't have supervised status. So there's a legal differentiation there. But as far as ratification, in order for the state to be a state, their constitution has to be ratified by the people, because that's the governing charter. Just like the Constitution of the United States had to be ratified. It's the supreme law of the land. Each state has its own constitution. New Jersey's wasn't ratified by the people until 1844. As a result of that, everything that the state did in an official capacity is moot and null and void prior to that date, including their dealings with us. They didn't have the legal standing to be able to enter into an agreement, let alone take the land back in violation of all these other federal laws which were already on the book.
That being said, if the courts were to go along with that reasoning, then what are you seeking from the courts as far as relief is concerned?
We are requesting of the courts all of our traditional lands, the acknowledgement and restoration of our water rights, which extend to the lakes, rivers, streams, as well as all the aquifers underneath of Wharton State Forest. Our traditional fishing, which goes from the bay that separates New Jersey and Delaware and extends from the low water mark up the coast to the mouth of the Raritan and 2.5 miles out. That's traditional Indian title. We are requesting of the courts that the state be given a restraining order from charging our people tolls on the bridges, registration on automobiles, any type of taxing whatsoever, because that's illegal according to the treaties that are still in effect. Basically the restoration of who we are, the acknowledgement of our culture, and being put back in our original status that we enjoyed prior to the United States and with the Commission of the United States. Originally, we have treaties with the British Crown, and they're similar in size and scope to all the treaties you find from Maine down through New York, because it's one of those first colonization periods. The treaties after the United States is established going west are different. The British Crown dealt with us as sovereign. Because of their right of discovery, they had to deal with us on a king-to-king basis. When the United States was formed, those treaties and land grants, if you would, were grandfathered in. And then with the establishment of the Trade and Intercourse Act of 1790, the United States codified the fact that only the Congress and the President of the United States could deal directly with the Indians on all matters relating to real property. In 1802, the state of New Jersey passed a law, which is kind of tricky because they weren't really a state because their constitution wasn't ratified, saying that they could sell our land in violation of the Trade and Intercourse Act of 1790.
So you have two violations there. One, the constitutional issue, and the second one, they were in violation of federal law.
Yes, and they were in violation of many more, which is in the brief we can provide for you.
So you're seeking, in addition to the water rights and exemptions, you're also seeking
hunting and fishing,
land, in effect, land grants or land restoration around the Wharton State Forest area?
Yes.
Okay.
When you take a look at the Winters water right cases that the Supreme Court ruled on, it's inherent. Any land that's reserved by the federal government for whatever the purpose, as long as it's reserved by the federal government, it is understood that the water rights are reserved with it. That's a fundamental legal tenet. It's non-disputable.
the $1 trillion figure is based on?
Well, if you take a look, and what I sat down is I tried to do a business valuation on what the tribe would hold if it were a business. So I took all the components, the aquifers, rivers, the rights for hunting and fishing, etc., folded them into a business, and then said if I was some big mogul and going to chop it up and sell it off, what would it be worth? That's how we arrived at the figure. It was actually closer to $2 trillion.
You're settling for half price.
Well, it's a bargain.
It's a recession.
Yeah, we're being kind. It's the reality is it is viable. If you were to go out and buy an aquifer, let alone the one that sits underneath the Wharton State Forest, that aquifer is the largest, purest on the eastern seaboard and feeds 4 states. The state of New Jersey has been just piping that water out, selling it. They've never made any type of payment to the tribe for doing that, and these rights remain vested in us. The only person that can cancel out a treaty, or the only entity, is the Congress of the United States. The Congress of the United States has never, ever canceled any of our rights. And the courts have ruled that you cannot even have an ambiguous leaning towards it. It has to be a specific intent for Congress to cancel out. They've never done it. We have a very small police department, but these gentlemen are allowed to carry armed on planes because our treaty rights are still in effect. Now, our traditions in the past have always precluded us from going through the courts and stepping up. We have a kind of a concept of, you know, the Dutch came and left, the French came and left, the English came and left. We'll just go up to the mountain and wait, and this will all sort itself out. However, with the election of me to the position of chairman, I'm not traditional. By training, I'm a financial advisor and a stockbroker, so I looked at them and said, yeah, we need to litigate. So we spent 6 months going back and forth to Trenton, spending hours in front of the commission, presenting documents from Seton Hall, University of Chicago, Smithsonian, Library of Congress, just a plethora of information, putting it into the hands of the Attorney General's office, putting it into personal representatives and the Chief of Staff for the Secretary of State. It went tough. You can't go to state court because it's a federal question. The actions of removing our people from the land illegally have had a genocidal effect on us. We need our land back. If you look at the Citizenship Act of 24, American Indians were not citizens of this country. So when you take the land away and you're not a citizen, you have no legal standing before the courts or anybody. You are landless, and you're without a country, and you're without a home. That's what happened to our people in this state. And the state of New Jersey, under the direction of its current governor and Secretary of State, have systematically refused to talk to us. So we have filed charges under the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871, and we are charging the governor with genocide and crimes against humanity for systematically trying to wipe our people out. And that is a case that, if you take a look at the underlying judicial precedent, requires the U.S. District Court, after they read the brief and the complaint, to immediately notify the appellate court, because we've requested a 3-judge panel under the law, and the only 3-judge panel resides at the U.S. Court of Appeals.
Philadelphia.
So we will go from here immediately to the appellate court, because it's required that it's done with due speed and we be given the next available calendar date. Because it's the commission of an act of genocide, etc., that involves a state official, which makes it a federal question on top of it.
Do you have are you acting as the attorney? Do you have an attorney? What's the...
No, I will argue the case.
You will do
for
it.
our tribe, yes.
Okay. And was your cell phone on that card by any chance?
The tribal office is.
Okay. Do you have a cell that you can share with me?
And me?
2-shot Thompson.
No, the tribal office will be fine.
Okay. You always.
Yeah,
it's
they don't
staff.
like me to carry cell phones around
Gotcha.
too much.
What is,
Okay.
Excuse me, I'm doing 2-shot. Let me just talk to each other.
I think I have it.
So you would anticipate that the appeals court that you would be before the appeals court in the next few weeks or so?
It's required by law.
Right.
The minute, if you look at the front of the brief.
Did you do this brief?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
I've got 1,200 man-hours into this brief. I just finished it at 5 this morning, finished printing. But if you look here on the face page, we requested a 3-judge court.
Yeah.
it has to be heard because it involves the governor, and we've actually called into question, based upon the ratification of the state of New Jersey's Constitution, we've called into question the legislative and congressional districts.
Okay, thank you.
They shouldn't exist.
Very good.
right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Very good. Nice to meet you.
You too. Briefly, I got a lot of it already, but detail again, if you could, the lands that you're asking for. Talk about your tribal lands.
Yes.
How many acres?
Well, if you take a look at lands that currently have, because we're claiming archaeological dig sites, burial grounds, sacred lands, as well as the original reservation in Wharton, you probably, I'm looking at about 125 to 150,000 acres.
And are these publicly owned? Are they privately owned mix?
Naturally, there's got to be some mix. I haven't looked too much into the private area. I've looked at where the state is actually doing work.
And what counties?
We've cited all the counties. Yeah,
but those acres are spread out throughout the entire state, in all 21
they're spread out,
counties.
but the largest 4 counties would be Bergen, Monmouth, Atlantic, and Ocean would be the largest land block, and then everything else is
Bergen,
scattered.
Monmouth, Atlantic, and Ocean.
Yeah. That's,
And where is the largest contiguous piece?
the largest piece that I've seen, the largest block would involve the old reservation lands in Wharton State Forest.
How many acres is that?
In and of itself, it's close to 100,000.
And what were the years that the reservation was in place there?
The land was set aside in 1758, and the state illegally sold it in 1802.
So that is where your people lived between those dates?
Yes.
Okay. 1758, 1802. And fishing rights from the Raritan Bay
All the way
south,
from the Raritan south,
River south,
yeah, the mouth of the Raritan, all the way south to the
to
bay.
the Delaware border.
Yeah, and then up through part of the Delaware, and then 2.5 miles off the coast is traditional Indian title.
Up the Delaware River, how far?
Roughly parallel to Trenton.
Is that the cellar of the home?
That's my home.
Up the Delaware to Trenton.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, basically the Raritan River following the shoreline around up the Delaware to Trenton.
Yeah.
Okay. And I know you said this a couple of times, but you know, in essence, I think throw an argument at you here. You know, it would be difficult for the state or federal government to give you that much land back.
Right.
What are you hoping for?
I'm hoping for a substantial dialogue so that we can find something that works well for both the people of the state and our people. We have a tradition where everybody in our land is welcome. And it's not everybody's fault that somebody took our land and sold it off. So, but I use the argument on the flip side: if somebody breaks into your house and steals your TV, and the cops find it 3 weeks later, steal your TV. So what we're hoping to is, what I would like to see is something that deals with specifically public lands and tries to avoid any impact on the private sector.
And official recognition, tribal recognition.
Oh, without a doubt.
And what are the advantages of that?
It's kind of like, what was your last name?
Ryan.
Okay. It's kind of like saying your family doesn't exist, but your family's here. You want to be able to say, hey, I'm Ryan, and this is my dad. That's what we view recognition as, and the fact that we are contributing members of the state.
Does that give you additional legal standing, though?
Within the state.
You know, does that enable you to operate within given grounds and control how that land is taxed and what items are taxed and whether or not you could build something like a casino or so on and so forth?
The recognition, if it came from the state, would give us the ability naturally to get grant monies. It would also acknowledge our sovereign status within the state, which sovereignty is a key issue. The United States likes to be sovereign, Mexico and everybody else. But yeah, that comes with it. Federal recognition is an entirely different construct.
And is it federal recognition that you would need in order to have a casino or share in the other privileges that tribes have?
Our position on that is we already own the land in front of, behind, and underneath Atlantic City. We got enough casinos. We want them to keep doing a good job at providing tax revenue to the state.
Yeah, and I bring up casinos because that's sort of the first thing that comes to mind.
Everybody does that, but if you own Atlantic City, there's enough casinos. Another one wouldn't increase business. It might detract from business.
And the lands that you're talking about include Atlantic City.
Atlantic County.
All of Atlantic County.
That's what we're claiming.
Gotcha. Are there any other counties in their entirety that you're claiming?
We're open to discussions again. We believe that the title and the deeds as we've seen them, as well as the treaties, bear out the traditional boundaries. And I've had a look at the USGS maps and gone and taken a look at the old namings and drawn the lines to conform. So it's...
So again, I want to make sure I've got them right on the land. So you're talking about between 125 and 150,000 acres scattered throughout the state, mostly in Bergen, Monmouth, all of Atlantic and Ocean counties.
There's a little bit in Passaic and Essex as well.
Okay. Okay.
The most important thing on this timeline actually is when the state started.
And I assume all that is
Started.
Yes.
Okay. Listen, I appreciate you taking a couple of minutes.
Not a problem.
Tell me what's happened today and why.
Well, our people have filed a federal lawsuit against the governor and the state of New Jersey, as well as all of the counties and their corporate holdings. I don't know if you're familiar with Bergen County. In the county of Bergen, you have a county agency, then you have a corporate counterpart. That's how they operate things in the state, as well as the freeholders.
No problem.
And the New Jersey Commission on Indian Affairs. We have cited genocide, as well as, well, I'll actually read you some of the counts. Probably the most pertinent that you'd be interested in is we filed specifically against Governor Corzine and Secretary of State Nina Wells in both their individual and official capacities, since they are involved in civil rights violations, and particularly we are citing genocide under the Ku Klux Klan Act of 1871, which, I don't know if you've had an opportunity to read it, but the first count, the very first count out of the chute, reads, the respondent did conspire and did commit the acts of fraud, genocide, and crimes against humanity, against petitioners, depriving petitioners' rights, privileges, and immunities, whereas respondent state actors John Corzine as de facto governor, state of New Jersey, and Nina Wells, de facto Secretary of State for the state of New Jersey, did know and should have known that the Constitution of the state of New Jersey was not ratified by the people of said state until August 13, 1844, receiving 20,276 yes votes and 3,526 votes against. Therefore, acts of respondent are under color of law because the state of New Jersey did not exist as a government or a corporate entity, thus making all sales or relinquishment of petitioners' lands, rights, privileges, and immunities mute and null and void. As a result of the political and corporate subdivisions could not have been in existence. Long and short of that is, since the Constitution of the state of New Jersey was not ratified until August 13, 1844, the state did not exist as an entity. Therefore, they did not have the right to take, sell, lease any of our tribal lands, waters, minerals, timber, anything that you can conceive of that is in relationship to our tribe and its history. The state didn't have jurisdiction over because they didn't exist as a legal entity. And when you discover a fraud such as this, the fraud cancels out everything from the date of discovery all the way back to when it was committed. So we're going back 207 years to address these wrongs. And we're requesting from the federal government that our traditional homelands, our water rights, our hunting and fishing rights, our Jay Treaty rights, our Treaty of Easton rights, as well as our civil rights and discrimination be looked into. And that the governor be, I believe we have asked for a ex parte Young ruling, because we are alleging that the governor acted in a illegal capacity in violation of federal laws, and as such he's not entitled to the defense of the state. He has to be sued and then tried as an individual. And if you look at the strictest definition of genocide and crimes against humanity, the governor is culpable for the state's extinguishing or attempting to extinguish all of our culture and our people. We're calling it historical genocide.
What exactly? He's responsible because he happens to be chief executive now, or did he take some action? I'm confused.
We have, as a people, tried to meet with this governor on numerous occasions, and we have been rebuffed, ridiculed, panned off, pushed off. We've appeared before the Indian Commission twice in the last 6 months and presented in excess of 150 documents. And to this date, neither he nor the Secretary of State have addressed us. They've refused to meet with us. They have not done anything to attempt to mitigate this. Our previous chief, we go back 10 years, trying to contact and deal with the state, and we finally got to the point where we had to take this action because the leadership of the state just refused to discuss the legality of our status in the state as its original indigenous people. We are the descendants of the Delaware, the Raritan, the Unami. We're a Lenape tribe that has Cherokee members. And when the Delaware and the Cherokee went back west, to Oklahoma, we stayed in the Wharton State area, on the reservation, in the Monmouth, Burlington, Atlantic, and Ocean Counties area. And we stayed here. And as a result of being the descendants that have never left the land, we are entitled to all the rights and privileges that fall under all the treaties that were signed. The state of New Jersey did not have authority to buy, sell, or take any of our property, whether it be real or personal, or land, the rivers, streams, lakes, the aquifers that reside underneath of Wharton State Forest, the bay that separates New Jersey from Delaware, the coastline from low tide from the bay all the way to the mouth of the Raritan River is ours for fishing. They don't have the jurisdiction to regulate us for hunting and fishing rights. They don't have the jurisdiction to force us to pay tolls. All of these things are exempt to us by treaty, but the state has systematically refused to acknowledge those rights, and that's why we're in court.
And the treaty that you're referring to?
The Treaty of Easton, the Jay Treaty, the Treaty of Ghent, any number of a host of U.S. codes, Title 18, Title 28, Sections 1331, 1362, 1367, 1345. I mean, the list is long. The complaint itself is right at about 32 pages. The brief, when the judge requires it, will come here somewhere around 85 pages.
What do you hope ultimately will be the outcome of your action today?
That my people are restored to their land, that the treaties are respected, and that the federal government will take a look at the systematic actions of the state of New Jersey over the last 250 years in ignoring their federal obligations as well as their treaty obligations. Our original treaties were signed by the New Jersey legislature in 1758 under the direction of Governor Bernard. And these lands in the treaty specifically state that they are non-transferable, that the state could not sell them, and neither could our descendants. And inherent with that, when you take a look at a case like the Winters water right case, whenever the federal government sets aside a land in reservation, inherent in that setting aside are the water rights that come with it, sufficient to irrigate the whole land, to provide for future generations, etc. What we want is the federal government to enforce our treaty rights upon the state of New Jersey, to take a look at what the governor and the Secretary of State have been doing in the way of discriminatory practices and actually assisting in the elimination of us as a people and our culture.
We should probably thank you for giving us
Stay right there a
background.
second.
I know you want to...
Let me just get a quick
Okay.
sense.
Does that work?
Yeah, I
Chat for another
definitely will have
second.
some more questions for you, but
Yeah.
I know you
I
had
know.
something set up here. Stay with me.
She was getting cold.
Oh, that's fine. That's
I was
fine.
just curious.
no problem.
For some background, and I thought we could get it on.
Okay.
Okay, Marie, thank you.
If the council he had been more receptive, he wouldn't be here? Is that basically the word?
We are here because the governor and the Secretary of State have refused over the course of the last 8 years to meet with us. I have made trips from all over the country to deliver documents from Seton Hall, from the University of Chicago, from John Kraft, Westlager, Rittenauer, presented them, put them in the hands of a half-dozen deputy attorney generals of the state of New Jersey, as well as the Secretary of State's representatives, and still they refuse to meet with us to discuss this. What else is left? You can't go to state court because the state only rules on state matters. It's a federal issue. New Jersey has violated every federal law in relationship to us from 1758 till the present.